All right, good morning. I have 10:30, and we will now commence the Enforcement Committee meeting of the Contractor State License Board. I am Kevin Albanese, Enforcement Committee Chair. And will the May 10th, 2016 meeting of the Contractor State License Board Enforcement Committee come to order? Everybody's to order. Committee members Nancy Springer, Marla Richardson, and Bob Lamb have been excused. And Heather, would you call the roll, please?
Kevin Albanese.
Here.
Dave Diaz. Here. Frank Shetter. Here. And Johnny Simpson.
Here.
Thank you.
And that confirms that we have a quorum. Could we just do a quick introduction, go around the table, and then the public, you can introduce yourselves if you'd like. You do not have to as well, but we'll start over here with you.
Rick Lopes, Chief of Public Affairs.
Christy Shields, Counsel for the Board.
Cindy Kanemoto, Chief Deputy Registrar.
Heather Young, Enforcement Analyst.
Johnny Simpson, Board Member.
David Fote, Chief of Enforcement.
Kevin Albanese, Board Member.
Cindy Christensen, Registrar.
Dave Diaz, Board Member.
Frank Shetter, Board Member.
Jesse Flores, Enforcement.
Wendy Ballvance, Testing Chief.
Laura Zuniga, Chief of Legislation.
Charlotte Allison, Licensing.
Ed Lang, Board Member.
Susan Guenzella, Board Member.
I'm Debbie Steffen, CSLB employee. Stacy Paul, CSLB budgets.
Allison Adams, CSLB Swift.
Irene Crowder Johnson, Support Staff Swift.
Missy Vickery, Enforcement.
Steve Grove, Swift Unit.
Daniel Cohen.
Cole Noman, Licensing Manager.
Eric Steffen, Swift.
Jason Stoddard, Swift.
Nev Lopez, Swift.
Jose Barajas, Swift.
Ashley Caldwell, Public Affairs.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, and thank you to our SWIFT personnel that are here, part of our meeting. A handful of board members and senior staff got a special treat the day before last week's quarterly board meeting, an all-access tour of the new Golden One Center in downtown Sacramento. When it's completed, this arena will be home to the Sacramento Kings and a multi-use facility for concerts and special events. A special thanks goes to board member Frank Shetter, who organized and provided the tour. And with that, go Kings, but being from the Bay Area and they're still playing, go Warriors. All right, do we have any comments from the committee members? Seeing none, do we have any comments from the public? All right, that was on that item, but now this time is provided for public comment pertaining to items on the agenda as well as items not on the agenda. However, the committee cannot take any action on items not listed on the agenda. Are there any individuals who wish to address the committee at this time? Seeing and hearing none, we're going to roll to the enforcement program update. To begin this update, I'd like to recognize a member of our enforcement team, Eric Stevens. It is now my pleasure to recognize Enforcement Representative Eric Stevens of the statewide investigative fraud team here in Sacramento. We were able to recruit Eric from the Department of Industrial Relations. It's my understanding Eric worked for DIR as a labor relations officer and for DIR's Division of Investigation as a deputy labor commissioner. During his tenure at DIR, Eric was motivated to work for CSLB after he became aware of our consumer protection mandate and the ability for non-sworn staff to issue notice to appear citations. Eric has proven himself to be a quick study and has excelled at representing the CSLB with our industry partners and consumer groups. Eric served in a lead role in performing enforcement and assisting consumers in response to the Valley Fire up in Lake County last year. This close working relationship Eric has developed with the North Coast Builders Exchange and with building departments has resulted in the following impressive statistics. During the past 9 months, Eric has performed 144 proactive investigations. His effective job site targeting resulted in 84 of the 144 investigations being referred to legal action. 35 of those 84 legal actions were referred for criminal prosecution of unlicensed or uninsured practice. The administrative civil penalties issued totaled $91,000 out of those. In addition to performing his enforcement duties, Eric has initiated outreach to community groups and unlicensed persons to explain the license requirements. He has performed outreach with day labor centers to assist their members in obtaining licenses if they are qualified, and he has explained employment license requirements to consumers seeking to find a contractor for construction work. So with that, I'd like to recognize Eric Stevens, ask him to come up if you have a few words to the podium.
Members of the board, executive staff, thank you so much. It's a tremendous privilege to be a part of this agency and to represent the board and to be led by great management staff, as well as supported by my team, colleagues, and support staff alike. So I feel tremendously honored for this recognition. I'd just like to thank you for that.
All right. Thank you again, Eric. You represent the CSLB very well. Through our update, getting into the agenda, item C, we have a few highlights out of the book here. On page 9, we have highlighted the Enforcement Academy and Advanced Course Training conducted by Deputy Attorney General Mike Franklin and retired annuitant Doug Galbraith in April. We thank you, Mike and Doug, for your continued training and leadership provided to staff. Unfortunately, board member Bob Lamb can't be here today, but on April 29th, when Mike and Doug completed their 5-day academy, Bob took the time to hand out graduation certificate for staff's completion of the training. In addition to attending the ceremony, Bob swore in CSLB's newest peace officer, longtime employee Arlene Balboa. Thank you, Bob, for supporting staff in their efforts. Turning to page 10, we provide some highlights of the Intake Mediation Center. Highlighted there are 2 cases handled by our CSRs. One includes a homeowner who was a police officer who contracted with his fellow police officer who did not have workers' compensation on his project, which is a misdemeanor. On the bottom of page 10, we have summarized an investigation that includes a request for an interim suspension order that will be heard by an administrative law judge on May 13th. This is a good example of how predatory service and repair contractors prey on the elderly and other consumer victims. This is a good time to mention that Dave will be attending a meeting with well-established national group of service and repair contractors on Friday. Dave will be able to discuss consumer protection concerns and the use of electronic tablet-based contracts that provide for electronic signatures which have been manipulated by unscrupulous contractors. Turning to page 10, we have highlighted an electrician certification investigation. It's my understanding that board member Frank Shetter met with Dave Fote and his staff this morning to talk about the success of the electrician certification program and the various enforcement opportunities. We turn to page 13, where we have a most wanted individual who acted as a plumbing contractor and targeted the elderly using fraudulent licenses. We expect to lure him to a sting very soon. Rick, I believe now is a good time to watch the enforcement's latest video on the solar industry. Work for you? Perfect.
And while we're warming up, just so the board knows, this was a story that was done by KCBS TV in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago. It aired, had to do with, well, it kind of self-explanatory, but it does have to do with solar. Excuse me, Dave, can you turn the lights, both light switches? Thank you.
Well, it's supposed to help you go green and save some money at the same time, but it could end up costing you big time.
Yes, CBS 2 investigative reporter David Goldstein joins us with the story that all homeowners should see.
Yeah, well, Pat and Paul, it's important for anyone looking to make home improvements. As part of our investigation, we set up hidden cameras to find out how some are preying on homeowners, especially the elderly.
Are you going to be able to help me with my roof?
In the effort to go green,
Go solar, there are incentives.
our undercover cameras found some contractors promoting so-called government programs.
It's a government baloney.
But is it really?
Can I talk with you a minute?
Or are they just telling you that to close the deal?
You suck, by the way. I'm kind of like a solar junkie, you know.
Dan Mason of Bellflower had these solar panels installed on his roof.
I just think solar's a good idea.
He and his wife Carrie are nearing retirement and hired All American Design after hearing their sales pitch.
Well, they came in and they said, well, your utilities are going to be cut in half.
Okay.
And basically the panels and the installation and everything will be covered by government programs.
But they say the government program they thought they signed up for was really a private company called Y Green. They provide financing for energy-efficient upgrades to your home. And the $37,000 cost of the solar wasn't covered by a government program at all, but is paid through an assessment on their property taxes. At 6.5% interest, it works out to nearly $5,000 a year for 10 years. Was there ever any mention that the cost was going to go on your property taxes?
None whatsoever. Well, we have a lot of complaints.
Nisa Wilson of the Contractors State Licensing Board says the Masons are typical targets of salespeople pushing green energy.
I would say a good number of our complaints come from the elderly.
Morning. Good morning, how are you?
So we had this senior citizen call several contractors.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
And set up a house with hidden cameras to see what would happen.
I'm Larry from All American Design.
All American Design is the company the Masons used, and they say Larry Sanchez is the same salesman who came to their house.
I need a energy efficient roof.
Oh, wow, okay, that's right up our alley. After inspecting and measuring her roof, Larry gets down to business.
Your house is eligible for certain programs. Like what? There's several programs. There's a program called Y Green. Okay, and there's also a government program, a backed program that's called HERO.
HERO stands for Home Energy Renovation Opportunity. It's a private company like Y Green, approved by local governments to set up repayment of loans through homeowners' property taxes. The money can be used for anything from air conditioning to windows to doors. It's not a government entity, however, you'd never know it with his sales pitch.
So because of what you have going on, this government program could actually help you. Oh, that is a government program. Yeah.
But the HERO guidelines for salespeople specifically says, don't say HERO is a government program.
The way the program works is you pay it back through your property taxes.
Sanchez finally got around to divulging just how the money would be paid back.
Well, how does that work, say, if I want to sell the house or something? It's actually not a problem at all.
But it can be a problem because HERO admits only about a third of homeowners have been able to sell their homes because buyers don't want to assume the loan. They instruct salespeople, don't say payments are transferable to a new owner if you sell.
You're dealing with, a reputable company. Okay.
What Larry didn't mention is that the Contractors State License Board has recommended that All American Design's license be suspended or revoked because of numerous unrelated violations.
Hey, Mr. Sanchez, I'm David Goldstein with CBS 2 News.
When we showed up, the sales pitch was over.
You said it's a government-backed program. HERO isn't a government-backed program. It's a private program, sir, isn't it?
It's a government-backed program.
You told her no problem at all to sell her house.
Yeah, it's true.
It's true. There's no problem at all. You haven't heard of any problems of people trying to sell their houses with HERO loans?
Call HERO.
I've talked to HERO. Or is she going to get stuck with a big tax bill and a tax lien like other people have?
With that, he had some parting words.
You suck, by the way.
And he wasn't the only one who exaggerated claims.
The HERO program is a governmental program.
This salesman also said it was a government program and came bearing some good news.
You got pre-approved between 41 to 45,000. Oh, really? Pre-approved, yes.
A HERO spokesperson told me on the phone that pre-approved doesn't comply with their rules.
How is she pre-approved for $41,000 to $45,000?
I don't know. They sent me from the office, and this is what they told me.
The CSLB says consumers should do their own research.
They need to make sure that what they're entering into, even though it's pitched by someone they feel is qualified, that they independently look up the information themselves.
It literally made me sick.
The Masons say their effort to go green has now derailed their retirement plans if it means they can't sell their house.
That dream's gone down the pipes just because of these people.
But Sanchez isn't talking.
You gave a great pitch in there. Why don't you give me the pitch? Come on, man.
Sell your story with someone else, not me.
Well, these loans have been around in L.A. County and most areas for less than a year. Officials say the problems may just be starting. Pat and Paul?
Is law enforcement getting involved at all?
You know, they are. The Riverside County DA says that they are looking into it. They've started an investigation. They won't mention any companies right now.
All right. Thanks, David.
Good job.
All right, Rick, thank you very much for sharing that. It's, I don't know if enlightening is the right word, but certainly something to take notice of as we have. Getting back into the program, or to the agenda board packet, page 20, Dave, can you talk a little bit about the general complaint handling statistics?
Thank you, Mr. Albanese. We are currently handling approximately 800 cases above the optimum number that we would hope to have on hand at any one time. And that's in large part because of excessive vacancies. We have approximately 26 vacancies, and what's most troubling is that 7 of those are in our intake mediation center. And when you couple that with staff that are on long-term leave, where we normally would have 31 case-carrying consumer service representatives, they're the ones that first receive our complaints. We receive around 950 consumer complaints a year. When that number drops down to 24, as we have in the packet, or as it was last week at 21 CSRs, it makes it difficult to manage the incoming cases. But we have developed a plan. We are going to rely on our investigative centers to take many of those cases, make timely calls, work those cases out of order. And plus, I want to thank Cindy Christensen and Cindy Kanemoto for approving overtime the next 3 Saturdays. So we are keeping up. We do have a plan in place. And perhaps most importantly, working very closely with our personnel office to look at how we can recruit, specifically in Southern California, to make sure we're filling our positions timely, but also we're able to fill temporarily behind staff that are on long-term leave.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dave. And on page 25, there is some information and an update on our enforcement strategies to address workers' compensation fraud. Dave, you want to talk about that as well, please?
Yes, please take a look at page 26. What we've done in response to board member suggestions that we improved the letter. We've added in the first paragraph the labor code that provides for up to 1 year in the county jail for violating workers' compensation insurance requirements. And we've also included a time frame to provide proof of workers' compensation insurance to the CSLB. And again, this letter was developed so that it would strongly encourage contractors that have workers and haven't made the Contractors Board aware of their policy to provide evidence of that policy, or they're going to be subject to further action. And I am also pleased to report the letters have been sent out. And if we could take just a quick run through of what is in the packet, I'd like to provide the committee an update. On page 27, We have mailed, at the last meeting, last board meeting, we had 34 suspect job sites that were work was being performed by contractors on large jobs that had exemption from workers' compensation insurance on file. It was 34 at that time. We subsequently increased that to 41 suspect project sites, and we did send those 41 contractors what we're calling our educational letter, again, the need for workers' comp. We've also met with the Labor Standards Enforcement, the director of the Labor Enforcement Task Force, Dominic Forrest, and we're going to be conducting joint inspections of job sites that include a contractor that we've issued a letter to and that has not obtained a workers' comp policy. So we're excited about that. We anticipate conducting those on-site inspections between June and August this summer. On page 28, we've highlighted our consumer complaints. What we found is that it's somewhat difficult through for our consumer service representatives. Again, they initially receive the consumer complaint. They do telephone settlements. They're gathering evidence. They're attempting to identify that somebody has a worker and has an exemption on file. When they do, they implement a suspension program. But you'll see that they haven't had a lot of success at least when we compiled this packet. Out of 275 that we are concerned about, we found that out of the 247 of the 275, we weren't able to identify whether or not they truly had workers. And one thing we have to do is we need an admission at this point, or we need to have a worker testify. We need to have evidence to move the case forward. And if we don't have that, it's being sent out to the field. We didn't send the educational letter on these consumer complaints because through the field investigation, we may develop sufficient evidence to take a formal action, like such as a citation or a referral to the DA, and that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later when we talk about how we can reduce some of our administrative costs. On page 29, this was we researched various classifications that are likely to have likely to require employee labor, and in doing that, we identified 62 contractors that had an exemption, but also have a website where it clearly shows that they're proud they have their own workers. They're doing large jobs. They have pictures of their workers, yet they don't have workers' comp. In the packet, I think we were at 52. We did an additional 10, so we sent 62 educational letters out on these cases. And for those that don't obtain a workers' compensation insurance policy, we plan to open complaints and investigate these contractors further. And what we would do is look at the consumer complaints that have been filed, look at the construction monitor database, and that was the database that helped us identify the suspect permitted construction sites. On page 30, we have an update regarding our public works contractors. Just to give you a little background on that, there's approximately 25,000 contractors that are registered with Department of Industrial Relations to perform public works projects, and we looked at every 100 on the list and found that 41 of those contractors had an exemption on file, which is very suspicious. When you're doing public works, you're generally going to have your own workers, or at a minimum, you're going to have office staffs. It's hard to believe you're working by yourself. And so we reached out to the Assistant Labor Commissioner, Eric Rude. We met with Eric, and we're going to be performing joint sweeps and maybe even look at conducting a sting at a public works project. I know some of you here today have offered, some of the board members have offered to help with this. So we're real excited about that. We do have Steve Grove with us. He's the manager over the statewide investigative fraud team. He's on board to make this happen. And just the last, on page 31, we've been working with a couple of counties pretty successfully in workers' comp enforcement. We'll talk about that during the plan to reduce legal action expenditures, but we're having some success. Monterey County is a really good example of have issued 2 press releases recently that relate to contractors that had workers' compensation insurance violations. We want to expand the success we've had in Orange County and Monterey County to the other 37 counties in the state, or the other 35 counties that are funded through the Department of Insurance Workers' Compensation Insurance Grant Fund program. So if there are any questions.
Outstanding, Dave. I'm real excited about what you and the staff have done with respect to workers' compensation enforcement, and and compliance, and I think that's really going to push the needle for consumers and for contractors in the state. Do we have any comments from committee members on the enforcement program update? Do we have any public comment?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi. Thank you for making a reasonable accommodation for public comment over the phone. My name's Eddie On of Brightline Defense. We're a nonprofit interested a lot in environmental justice issues and workforce development issues. And it's our first time before this board, and we're really excited to see the good enforcement actions. I wanted to draw your attention to a specific paragraph on page 12 of the packet, which was about a tragedy where an uncertified electrician employee was critically injured. And wanted some further clarification on a particular line, which talked about the investigation revealing that the contractor had no certified electricians on staff, and the board's industry expert concluded that the installation required skilled electrical employees, not laborers. Was wondering what the details of that investigation were, and just to reiterate our belief that we believe solar should be good-paying jobs, and there should be definitely strong safety standards involved, and this paragraph should highlight that. But would like a little more specification around, was the laborers outline a reference to organized labor, or what? Just wanted more clarification on that sentence generally. Thank you.
The item is not specifically on the agenda, but I don't know if the board has that information available to the public in a report or other file that you could maybe provide under a Public Records Act request.
Well, if I understood, part of the question was how did we receive this information? If that was, I can answer that. It was part of our program to share information with the Division of Occupational Safety and Health. When a worker is significantly or severely injured on a job site or is killed on a job site, we have a memorandum of understanding and also a statutory requirement that they make the Contractors Board aware of it. So this was one of those referrals.
In terms of figuring out how the investigation came about. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other public comments? Oh, I don't think you could comment. No, as a board member cannot make comment.
If you're not on this committee and a quorum of the board is present, so I don't know how many board members are totally.
We have eight,
We have
so
eight?
we have a
Okay,
quorum,
then-
yes.
Then they
so
cannot at this point.
regretfully, the chair cannot recognize you. All right, any other public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we're going to roll to agenda item D, the strategic plan of enforcement objectives. Jesse, can you please comment on our strategic objectives as shown on page 35?
Sure, thank you, Chair. This year we had a strategic planning session regarding things that we think are going to help the enforcement program. And the following are the 6 items that we decided to be a priority to help us enhance our enforcement program. Regarding the implementation of MOU, that's 1.1 on page 35. Our chief met with Assistant Labor Commissioner Eric Rude to encourage the referral of cases regarding premium fraud. As of today, we have about 26 referrals, and we're looking to get more referrals. 1.2, the civil penalty assessment. We've created a matrix regarding civil penalties, and we're going to be meeting with the Attorney General's office and administrative law judges to have them input on our matrix and how we're going to assess these civil penalties during hearings. And we'll report back to you once we get that, after that meeting. 1.3, enforcement objectives addressing solar fraud. We currently have a task force that are focusing on the solar fraud, as you saw in that clip. In addition, we're working with our partners in other states, Arizona and Nevada, and we will have an update for the June board meeting. 1.4, regarding the strategy to misuse the workers' comp. I think the chief addressed that previously in the update. 1.5, the objective regarding the reduction of legal action expenditures, that's the next agenda item, so I'll reserve so you guys can discuss that. And lastly, 1.6, the objective to expand proactive enforcement. In addition to the MOU we have with the Labor Commissioner, we are going to be targeting stings and sweeps related to public works projects. In addition, the SWIFT staff has also identified projects that we could focus on and target to address the violators. Some of those projects are going to be homeowners association apartment complexes, which we typically don't do, and I think we'll find more violators that way. So that's my update. Any questions?
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Jesse. Are there any comments or questions from members of the board or committee? Seeing and hearing none, any questions or comments from the public? Seeing and hearing none, we will move to agenda item E. Review, discussion, and possible approval of a legal action expenditure reduction plan. Along the lines with what you were talking about, Jesse, one of our strategic objectives is to reduce our legal action expenditures. Dave, I understand that you and Cindy have been meeting with the Attorney General, Office of Administrative Hearings, board staff, and other stakeholders to develop a possible plan. Can you please update the committee on that?
Yes, thank you. On page 39 at the bottom, we provided information regarding our proposal to work with the 37 DAs that represent 42 counties that are funded by the Department of Insurance. This would relate to any consumer, generally a consumer complaint, could be an industry referral, that has a workers' comp violation and perhaps other violations such as you could have elder abuse, grand theft, something like that where it warrants a criminal prosecution. Instead of relying on an administrative action for the discipline, we're proposing that we would work with those counties to provide referrals, at least 3 in each county. And the reason why we wanted to highlight that here is it will require somewhat of a redirection of staff. We would like to redirect an investigator to be responsible for each of those counties so that we can make sure that we can report back on the success. And that could result in a substantial reduction in the legal action costs as it relates to an accusation. That's just, again, to suspend or revoke the license, because if you can get a criminal referral, you can request that the license be suspended on arraignment and revoked upon conviction. On page 40, we're looking at investigative efficiencies. The board has previously adopted what we refer to as zero tolerance policies for workers' compensation compliance and also permit compliance. And what that means is that if a case is at the Intake and Mediation Center, it could still be resolved short of a legal action if the contractor pays restitution to an injured consumer, settles the case. However, if it's referred to an investigative center, the staff are issuing legal actions for those violations. And so what this proposal would do is for permits, we would free up the field investigators to consider allowing the contractor to obtain a permit and go back at their expense and make any necessary corrections to comply with code and avoid a citation for a first offense. I did discuss this with board member Nancy Springer, who's also on this committee, unfortunately can't be here today, and she was in support of this because it could increase the number of settlements or compliance, I should say, and reduce our expenses while holding the contractor accountable for the cost to comply with code. For the workers' comp, this proposal would encourage staff to look towards suspending a license for a workers' comp violation, putting that suspension on the website, but for a first-time offense, considering not issuing an administrative citation. Not to say that if they're not willing to obtain a policy, a citation may still be appropriate. Number 3 is settlement training, and what we're asking for here is permission to pay for the AG's office to receive training. There are deputy AGs that handle our cases, our appeals, to be provided training so that they're more aggressive in attempting to resolve a citation or even an accusation short of the need for a hearing. Our statistics show that our legal actions are solid. We rarely, we typically will prevail. And it doesn't do the contractors board or the cited individual any benefit in going to a hearing and incurring all those legal action costs when we can settle it and move forward, and the contractors board and the cited person would save money. So we would provide training to the deputy attorney generals and also training to our staff. So when we have an opportunity to settle legal action, we can do it earlier in the process, thereby avoiding the often lengthy costs that are incurred when someone does appeal and then takes it to a 2 or 3 day hearing. At the top of page 4, we're considering a legal action strike force, or at least I think what we need to do there is ask for approval, perhaps to move forward in determining if we can establish a strike force. Because right now we don't have clear legislative authority to do so. So this would be asking the committee for approval to move forward and coming back with a concept, or whether it would require regulations or legislation. We'll determine that. We have our attorney here, Christy. Would you want to comment on that at all?
I think in examining this item, I don't know if you necessarily need a strike force, but you may need some authority to delegate the registrar's ability to review these cases and settle them. So what we're talking about is some of the agencies in the department have something called informal conferences that allow people to appeal, to sort of informally appeal these citations and have these settlement conferences at the informal level as opposed to having a formal hearing process. But typically they have a regulation or a statute that backs up that authority. So what we're talking about doing is pursuing legislative or regulatory authority to hold informal conferences. They are not before an administrative law judge. They do not involve the Attorney General's office. They're conducted by a designee of the executive officer or the executive officer or the registrar. And that would be something that you would need to seek legislative or regulatory authority to do. But it is an alternative to having a formal administrative hearing. And there are several statutes that we could borrow from, including the Board of Pharmacy has several statutes and regulations that allow them to do these kinds of conferences. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Does any committee member have any questions? Does any committee member have any questions on that particular item? All right.
Do we need a motion or anything to do anything? Or no?
We will to do all 5.
Okay.
So I think you have one more you want to talk about, David?
Yes. Yes, on page 41, increasing civil penalties, we have a regulation that does provide for us to assess significant civil penalties when warranted. When Registrar Christensen and I met with the presiding law judge, Alan Alford, he suggested that we need to meet with the administrative law judges that hear our cases and explain to them our process. So what this is doing, asking for authority to move forward on that, we would explain to the deputy attorney generals that handle our cases and also to the administrative law judges how we settle cases. I mean, the reality is we do 19,000 investigations a year, and out of that we have 1,400 citations as an example. We're looking for opportunities to gain compliance and protect the public, but they need to understand that we're working with contractors to resolve complaints. It's when we can't do that, or there's a serious injury to somebody, they won't pay it to mitigate the damage, that we do go to a citation. So we would like to see the civil penalties increased. The reality is our average cost on a citation appeal is $5,000, and our civil penalties that are being assessed are between $1,000 and $2,000. So that would be something we would move forward on, report back after we have the meeting with the deputy attorney generals and the presiding law judge, or the administrative law judges. And at the bottom of page 41, we have monitoring the billings a little more closely. What this would do is identify one of the enforcement staff to be responsible for monitoring the billings, and any billing that's coming in on an appeal, whether it be a citation or an accusation or a statement of issues, which is an application denial, that exceeds $10,000, we would take a hard look at that, meet with the supervisor at that office, and find out why the cost is that great. Unfortunately, we've had some appeals that have cost far more than that. Had we known about it earlier on, we might have stepped in and said either it needs to be scheduled for a hearing or you need to return it if you're not comfortable with the case. Maybe it needs more investigation, but we can't continue to allow cases to have hours billed when a hearing is not been scheduled. That's not cost effective. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we will be looking for a motion on those items, but before we get there, is there any committee question or comment on the 6 items that David talked about? Seeing and hearing none, any public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, Johnny.
Yeah, I had a question on settling cases out with the AG's office. Would that be at our discretion which one we wanted to move forward with and which ones we wanted to
Yeah, that's a very good question. If it's an accusation, as an example, often when we are referring something to an accusation, the settlement would be revocation of the license. But the Attorney General's office is not empowered to make any settlement that we have not approved. So what they'll come back to our staff, and we have a disciplinary services section that's dedicated to working with the Attorney General's office. The assigned Deputy Attorney General will put forward a settlement to our staff saying they're looking for a revoked stay with conditions as an example. That means that they could retain the license if they post a disciplinary bond, pay restitution to somebody. We will look at the case and decide if that meets our public protection mandate. It may, but if it doesn't, then our answer would be no. The only settlement we'll entertain for that accusation would be outright revocation, which is our ultimate discipline. And a citation, what is typically proposed is a reduction in civil penalties. The Deputy Attorney General will want the registrar to agree to reduce the civil penalties and settle the citation. But again, we look at that. Sometimes they want to have the order of correction dismissed or a significant violation dismissed. We talked a little bit about service and repair, and one of the concerns is the misrepresentation. So if the proposal is to dismiss the misrepresentation violation or a fraudulent act, our answer will generally be no. We won't agree to that.
Any other public comment? All right, so the Enforcement Committee is asked to recommend to the full board approval of the investigative strategies to reduce legal action expenditures as follows. Pursue criminal rather than administrative, and this is just a summarization of what Dave talked about. Pursue criminal rather than administrative prosecution of workers' comp insurance violations. Provide for issuance of a warning letter when a contractor is a first-time offender and has mitigated a permit violation by complying with code requirements and paying restitution to the injured parties. Establish criteria to provide for an increase in citation civil penalties. Seek a legal action strike force or regulatory legislative approval to settle administrative actions without an administrative hearing. And redirect staff to monitor Office of Administrative Hearings, thank you, and AG expenditures, and conduct monthly meetings with the AG's office to discuss excessive billings. So before I ask for a motion, is there any public comment or? Christie, counsel?
I just have one suggestion for item 2, that it state issuance of an educational letter as opposed to a warning letter.
Committee good with that?
Thank you.
All right, any public comment or committee comment? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
David, and we have a second. Heather, can you please call the roll?
Kevin Albanese.
Aye.
Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Frank Shutter.
Yes.
Johnny Simpson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item F, update and report on consumer satisfaction survey. Each year, the CSLB conducts a survey of complainants regarding their satisfaction with the service they received. We are pleased to have testing manager Wendy Belvance here with us today. Wendy, would you please review the 2015 survey results with the committee?
The 2015 annual Consumer Satisfaction Survey Report on page 45 is based on surveys of people who filed complaints with CSLB against licensed or unlicensed contractors. It covers complaints that were closed during the calendar year of 2015. We have been surveying the public satisfaction with enforcement's complaint handling since 1993. We reach out through SurveyMonkey to all complainants who have provided us with email addresses. The response rate of 20% is respectable and is similar to that of other years. The survey results for questions 1 through 8 are best viewed in Figure 2 on page 53. Each year you can see some ratings go up and others go down. This is normal variability. Across the years, the highest ratings have traditionally gone to the question about courteous treatment by our staff, and the lowest ratings you can see are for the question on whether the action taken was appropriate in the complainant's opinion. Question 9 results covering whether the complainant inquired about the contractor's license status prior to hiring can be seen on page 50. 42% of the complainants did check license status prior to hiring. Lastly, any comments that people write in at the end of the survey are sent on to enforcement for review and possible contact. Are there any questions?
Any committee comment? Public comment? I just like to point out, one of the things that jumped out at me, page 66 and 67, just the great work that our board is doing through the enforcement actions and consumer protection, but how, what appears to be, if I'm reading this right, Wendy, that most of the complaints come in on contracts at $2,000 or less. Is that right? Looking at page,
Yes.
table C5, yet they're damaged in excess of $30,000. So how something so small in a residential job could turn out to be so disastrous by having, whether it's unscrupulous or untrained contractors out there. So that just jumped out at me and found that interesting. So no public comment or committee comment? With that, we're going to get into agenda item G, which is adjournment. And unless anybody has anything, this concludes the Enforcement Committee meeting.